I saw a myriad of inversions happening from Shirsasana A, Shirsasana B to forearm balance, which really blew my mind, and then to handstands that were happening somewhere in the middle of the room. But I was so physically wiped that all I could do was lie sideways. And I remember watching people and being like, I want to do that. That looks amazing. Like, and I think the kid-like side of me was like, the physical side of me really wanted to do that. It just looked like a lot of fun, but I had no energy to do it. So what did I do? That class was a 6 p.m. class. The next day I went back and I went back and then I went back.
Hi, I'm Derik Mills. Welcome to a special edition of the Glo Podcast. Today I'm handing the microphone over to two Glo teachers, Jason Crandell and Dice Iida-Klein. I've been extremely lucky to get to know both of them and work with them for roughly the past 11 to 12 years. So we're aiming for episodes like this to become part of a series on the Glo Podcast where our teachers take over, host the interviews, and sometimes interview each other. They'll share their passions about the philosophy and practice of yoga, mindful movement, meditation, what they value and wish to see more of in the world, their learnings, and anything else we hope you might enjoy learning about them. I'm so excited to listen to these conversations. I've been privileged behind the scenes working on Glo to sit in on conversations teachers have had between each other, with students, with our team. And I remember thinking those conversations were so powerful and inspiring, and I wished often that we had recorded those thoughts for our members. And so this is an attempt to do just that. In this episode, Jason and Dice discuss what it means to be a teacher, among many other things. As Jason says, quote, "The best way to have beginner's mind is to actually be a beginner at something. And as a teacher, if you are not an active beginner in something, you're going to lose a certain amount of humility, empathy, and skill," end quote. I really appreciate their sweet moments of candor and mutual admiration, and that they address what it means to continually ask oneself and others, what is yoga? And how by asking that question and being in conversation, we can move towards greater inclusivity, learning, curiosity, growth mindset, psychological safety, all of which, in my opinion, are some of the qualities and core values of the best teachers. You'll hear their reflections on teaching online and the importance of considering one's movement mindfully, both in the moment and across life stages. I also appreciate that they share how they address and navigate some of their own limitations and boundaries with humility, the benefits of skillfully navigating constraints, and how vital adaptability is. I hope you enjoy this conversation between Jason and Dice.
So Dice, so a tiny bit of context here. I think it's interesting, right? Because we've both been on Glo for a long time.
Yes, sir.
So even though we haven't met each other more than one time, which is really weird, and it was actually really brief weird. At once, I think we know each other through being at least on again, off again, distant students from time to time. I take your classes, and I'm gonna think once in a while you've taken my classes.
That's a wonderful assumption to make. It's very honest. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I have a couple of questions about you as a practitioner. And then those are going to kind of lead into some questions I have about you and your experience as a teacher, right?
Okay.
So the first question that I have is, you have a super broad and deep movement-based background, right? You have been a yoga asana practitioner for quite some time. But I have to assume that you have worked with other different modalities, right? Mm-hmm. So really my question is, can you tell me a little bit about your non-yoga, like movement upbringing? Like what kinds of physicality was there before the yoga asana practice?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a wonderful question. It's actually one that, I'm sure you've been interviewed many times by many different people, but no one ever thinks to ask prior to the yoga, or at least the running into yoga. Yeah, I mean, I, as far as movement in sports from a young age, I'd say, around the age of 5 and 6 is when baseball and hockey became the rotation as far as movement.
Okay, I'm going to pause you already. I'm going to do a terrible job of being a host, and I'm going to already stop you. Where did you grow up, and how was hockey part of that?
So I'm actually born. I'm born and raised Los Angeles. Believe it or not, I'm not a transplant. I'm actually from here. But age 0 to 6, I mean, I started playing baseball. Baseball was actually earlier. Baseball was already by like the age of 3 or 4, started being able to throw the ball, hit the ball. T-ball was the first thing. And that was kind of like the first love. That was the thing that stuck. At the age of 6, my mother, she got a new job at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And so we moved to Boston. Hence
that
hockey.
makes sense now.
Yeah. Sorry?
Was your mother, was she on the medical side or was she on the administrative side?
No, medical. My mother is a retired molecular biologist. Actually, specifically, she's an endocrinologist. She was. When she was in that profession. So very much in the medical field. Yeah.
So you moved to Boston age 6 and you were introduced to hockey, that is correct. I started playing hockey at 5 in Detroit. So the thing is, like, if you play hockey in the States, you're from one of 3 places. You're from Detroit, or you're from the upper Midwest, or you're from New England, right? Those are the only options.
Those are the 3 pockets. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
And then did you stay with that sport for a period of time? Did you play for a while?
Yeah. So, I mean, I played hockey right until bantam. So we're basically being able to check, starting to be able to use a little more physicality. And then at the age, right around 12, right as I entered bantam, that's when my mom decided to move back to California. And so
got it. And hockey is gone.
Well, yeah, because the price of playing ice hockey was like almost double or triple what it was over in New England, where it's just a regular sport, So I ended up, what was cheaper was inline hockey. I picked up rollerblades and learned how to play hockey that way. So I still stuck with it, but there's no checking in roller hockey. They just always felt like it was too much, I guess. I don't know what the reasoning was, but I think hockey ended around probably the age of like 14 for me. So as far as movement modalities, hockey, baseball, early years, but also one of the other main ones was just always tennis was another one from a very young age.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, the truth is, like, I think with the movement side of things, my mother will quote this. She'll say it. The only way to get me to sleep was to make sure that I moved. If I didn't move as a kid, I mean, that's probably the case for most people, that I was kind of unmanageable to especially when it came to my energy and personality, all of it. So, the physicality of things was brought to my attention very early that movement for me is a good remedy or medicine, for things.
I played hockey very seriously too, but what I'm wondering now is, like, was there then a bridge? Did it go from hockey and baseball and inline kind of directly into some exposure to yoga, or was there a more of a movement art that was a bridge? Did you have exposure to gymnastics? Did you have exposure to like breakdancing? Was there something in there that kind of put those two things together?
No. So honestly, all these, I guess you could say, organized recreational sports, where those are all the different facets of movement that I was attached to. But there really wasn't any martial arts, right? I feel like martial arts kind of is like a bridge between things like that. But no, I honestly the only way I discovered, let's say, hand balancing, arm balancing, all those things, the idea of being on my hands, which I guess has become somewhat of a forte, and it's really one of the most enjoyable things for me, was not through gymnastics or anything like that at a young age. It came about upon discovering yoga asana. in 2007. That was the only exposure I ever had to it.
So what got you in the room that first time?
Yeah.
What got you into yoga? Like, what was it? Okay. What was it and where was it?
I started working for Lululemon on their at the Beverly Hills store full time.
Okay.
I graduated from UCLA, and I was going to move to Japan and teach English, but hadn't touched yoga, anything. Just in the interim, while the JET program made me wait. You know, there are a few months where they not only running background checks and all this, but they just make you wait before they send you off. I was like, I need to make money. So a friend had a way in for Lululemon on the sales floor here in LA. Started teaching. I started working there full time and started taking classes for free because I don't know if they do it still, but as long as you wore Lululemon apparel, you could take anything for free, gym membership, any class, you name it. So from that, I was like, okay, I'll try a yoga class. So first yoga class, Sarah Ivanhoe, Yoga Works, Montana.
Oh my God. Well, talk about cutting through the riffraff, like just getting to a good spot right away.
Getting right in.
So I'm going to let you go in a second, but I am currently on retreat right now. And I was having this conversation with students last night. And I said this a few years ago when Matthias Ratti passed. I said that I think Matthias Ratti is one of, if not the most influential yoga teachers of this last century. And the reason being is nearly everyone has been influenced by her and they don't know it.
That was the big one, is that they don't know it.
Right? It's because they don't know it. No, they're like, who? She's not know it. I guarantee, like, if you do vinyasa yoga and you pay attention to where you place your foot, I can pretty much tell you a lot of that came from her and her teachers, right? And so that was such an epicenter of yoga. I mean, going back to the 90s, but especially in the early 2000s. And Sarah, who we have also worked with, such a good teacher there. So you found yourself in a pretty remarkably good place right away. So you landed in Sarah's class.
I landed in Sarah's class, and I actually look forward to hearing about your humble beginnings as well. So I actually want to ask, but I'll keep going with mine. But I didn't realize being in Los Angeles, you know, I mean, obviously with the Western take on yoga and the way it's been absorbed here, I didn't realize that LA was kind of like a hub. I mean, in the beginning, there was no understanding other than San Fran, you know, up a little more north. I happened to stumble into that studio, which was Chuck and Mati's studio. You know, I didn't know that was the home. That was actually the home base. But I fell into Sarah's class. I think it was a Vinyasa Flow level 2-3. It was a 2-3 class. And I mean, I don't know how much we can curse on here, but that's pretty much how I felt.
But
by minute 55, she gave the window of 2 or 3 minutes to invert of any kind. And that was the first time I was like, invert? What do you mean? Invert? So I saw a myriad of inversions happening from Shirsasana A, Shirsasana B to forearm balance, which really blew my mind. And then to handstands that were happening somewhere in the middle of the room. But I was so physically wiped that all I could do was lie sideways. And I remember watching people and being like, I want to do that. That looks amazing. Like, and I think the kid-like side of me was like, the physical side of me really wanted to do that. It just looked like a lot of fun, but I had no energy to do it. So what did I do? That class was a 6 p.m. class. The next day I went back and I went back and then I went back, including her class, including Vinny Marino's class. And then kind of stumbled into Raghunath Capo, who used to be here in LA, who really mixed in the philosophy of yoga as well as the asana and really had a beautiful way of marrying the two into a class, but also found the Cahills at the time, Brock and Krista Cahill as well, who were really popular here in LA over a decade ago for especially inverting. That was the big thing. So that's how I stumbled into yoga and obviously the asana, but also just the time on hands. That's where it hooked me. Prior to yoga, I had no idea that was possible or even something capable, something possible for me to do.
So you had so many good teachers, right? And knowing all of those people, it's interesting, right? Because I can kind of see influences and pieces of the puzzle. I know that you also took class for a period of time. Was Noah Maze a regular teacher of yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think Noah was a little less on the frequency, but the one thing I will say is he was a main faculty in my 200-hour training, which was an Anusara training.
Okay, so that's kind of where I was going, right? So
yeah,
just to give even broader context for people that are listening. So that world of YogaWorks, especially in those early 2000s, and the teachers that Dice spoke of were all, and many still are, exceptional teachers, right? And that world, and one of the reasons I say that Mati was so influential was Mati was really, and that world really was blending schools of yoga while retaining a high level of integrity in each one of those schools.
Right? Beautifully said. Yeah.
Right. So did you spend much time in any of those root schools? So for example, like, did you spend time more in the Iyengar world or more in the Ashtanga world or more, I mean, Anusara in a way is also a derivative, a derivative of those. Or did you spend more time with that like high integrity, cross-pollination set of teachers?
Well, I would say majority is definitely the cross-pollination. But again, because even during my teacher training and even during those, let's say the first year of yoga, I was still working part-time with Lulu to where I was still taking all the classes that I could everywhere. So I wasn't just to that Montana studio. I would end up.
You were hooked.
Oh yeah, I was doing 2-a-days, football 2-a-days. I was doing yoga 2-a-days, morning before I went to work, and then afternoon or evening before everything else. That's what I fell in love. And so YogaWorks was a main staple when it came to like, a lot of, I think, the cross-pollination, but I also fell in love with the Anusara practices like Chris Chavez, who is now in Istanbul in Turkey, but he used to be here in LA. He was one of my primary Anusara teachers. And I mean, who else? It was just a big mixture where also Ashtanga, I did Ashtanga heavily for about 1 year. I think it was from 2008 to 2009. So after a year of doing kind of the mixed, the cross-pollination, I guess we could say, I did hit Ashtanga for about a year straight, and the primary series became a pretty normal thing for a while there. So I did dive into like one lineage in a sense, pretty heavily at one point, but over time, and I think this speaks to even where I am now with the things that I share within yoga and movement, is I really love the aspect of, inclusivity in the mixture of things, and I think that, like you said,
I want to get to that. Like that's kind of like a big interest point for me. And I want to get there, but I have a couple more, just like staying narrowly within the more of the yoga mix before we kind of get to that.
Yeah. Please keep me in line. Thank you. I'll tend to go off.
Your 200 hour was specifically an Anusara training.
Yeah. So that's why, like, when it came to sequencing, I learned flow or vinyasa flow sequencing by taking a lot of YogaWorks classes. That was more where I learned the art of vinyasa flow. I didn't learn it through a training at all. It was always by taking, and like, if you think about it, like Annie Carpenter, also one of my main teachers for really, especially early on, she had her hand really on the YogaWorks training for a long time there. And I remember, just by taking all these different classes, even though each teacher was different, there was still some sort of template that you could roughly decipher if your ears, eyes, and your feeling were open to it. You could really pull it apart as a teacher. And I really absorbed that, because to me, although I learned Anusara, I loved Anusara for the alignment. I loved that part of, it wasn't even necessarily anatomy, but their alignment, the way they cued. And I also loved that most of the teachers from the Anusara community seem to have some sort of lightness and levity to them. Not that other people were so serious, but it was sometimes stern, which I appreciated.
They were overt about it.
Yeah, they were very overt about it.
It was part of their part of their mission. It was part of their culture. It was part of their personality. It was part of the brand.
Absolutely.
Was that levity and that kind of like overt heart-based work, right? They
open to grace.
They were very clear about spelling out the kind of psycho-emotional agenda I don't mean that in any negative way, right? They
no, I understand.
That was a mission of theirs. But did you ever teach, like, on your bio, was it ever like Anusara influenced, or or has it?
Yeah, it was on there. I mean, actually, I think my bio hasn't really shifted much, but it says
we only change our bios when someone's like, dude, it says you've been teaching yoga for 6 years.
Pretty much. Like, actually, someone brought that to my attention. I think my bio right now says like 10 years, and it's like, oh no, it's long overdue. I definitely it's in there. It says that I took my training, an Anusara training, 200-hour at City Yoga of all places, which was a Yoga Works, over there at Santa Monica and Fairfax, so yeah, I mean that's the beginning stages, and I mean that was a 200-hour, and like with a 300-hour, that took some time, because it's so funny to have to lead trainings and the specifics. I mean, I'm deviating here, but like what's necessary to lead trainings, the prerequisites and all that to have a 300-hour.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So 200-hour Anusara. That's right.
So when did this is going to kind of pretty soon take me into teaching, right?
Okay.
So we've kind of built this arc for you. At what point did you start incorporating other movement modalities that don't fit a little bit more overtly under the asana world, right? Like, do you climb? Is climbing part of the background? I assume you do some sort of functional training or functional range conditioning, like and kind of seeing you, your aptitude as a student, but also the way you teach. I can see all of that yoga work stuff, but I don't see you currently limited to that content when you teach now. So at some point, you are cross-pollinating as a student a little bit outside of the yoga room again. When and what?
So I mean, when the first initial would be right after my son was born in 2013. The adage, and it's so cliche to say, but injuries are your greatest teachers, or at least injuries can be a great catalyst to make you shift gears. I was so focused on getting my foot behind my head for so long, up until 2013, that I ended up getting there. And then I ended up basically over-nutating the right SI joint. So there was a pop. There's something that happened during one practice. And I was good for about a week. And then all of a sudden, I started having issues of being able to get out of bed and roll out of bed. And this is all still during teaching many classes, leading things. And yoga asana specifically was not cutting it anymore. That was the first time after 7 years of practicing, or 6 years of practicing just heavily yoga asana. That was it as far as the physicality. That was the first shift. I had to look elsewhere. I first went to Ido Portal, went to the movement method there first.
Okay. Yeah.
Who pointed out immediately that my pull strength was lacking, one, for the shoulder girdle. I had good push strength, but no pull. And then the most important thing, he's like, oh, you have SI joint issues? Let's look at your squat. Let's look at your deadlift. Let's look at those kinds of things. And they were, I mean, I had no strength whatsoever in those areas.
So kind of like hip hinge stuff and posterior chain strength. Posterior chain.
There. Look, we can, I can deviate, but like even the cue of like not over engaging your glutes that I drove home for so long, like those things.
We all did. We were wrong.
Wrong, straight up.
It's okay.
Created a dysfunction in myself, and I'm sure many other people. And I think I'm a great example of experimentation on myself, how that could go wrong, and that went wrong. I mean, I was doing something maybe that wasn't so useful, but nonetheless, the moment I started looking outside of yoga asana, as far as physical things, is when that started to rehab itself quite quickly through Ido.
You saw some of the gaps in your training, maybe.
Precisely.
Some things you had overdone and some other things you had underdone.
I had underdone, or I in order to specialize in something. I mean, Ido says this is like when you specialize in something, you get really good at it, but don't forget that specialization also is a sacrifice of some kind elsewhere.
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a beautiful thing to consider, is that it doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just something to really make note of. And so that was the initial 2013 when it shifted. Iida was like kind of like the first entry into that. And then over time, when it came to arm balances, let's say, and hand balancing, the whole, there's another one, shoulder blades, depression of the scapula whilst in a hand balance.
We were so convinced that the shoulder blade, no matter what, has to pull down.
No matter what.
It's as if the scapula is a non-moving thing and it just pulls down.
No, you want your neck out of your turtle shell. You never want to feel like, it's covering you. So that became another thing that I went to different acrobatic schools, just handstand classes from like circus schools, just to try it out. And then to have,
is that when you started doing handstand on like canes, what do they call those, like
the canes, like canes and parallettes too? I mean, any apparatus that.
What's a parallette?
Parallette is you can use PVC pipe, anything that puts your wrist more in a neutral space. So rather than being extended or flexed, you're right in the middle, right? You're just using, it's almost like holding onto rings, essentially, if you were hanging. Playing with handstands that way. But the main thing was all of them saying, look, shoulder blades down the back is not a wrong position. But if we're looking for longevity of time in, let's say, a pencil handstand, or you want to work on a one arm, we're going to have to train your scapula to elevate, and we need some upward rotation there, buddy. Like that's stability, And so they changed that part of my practice. And then on top of that, having like Ido from back in the day say, look, you have no pull strength, is when I started incorporating more ring work. So not necessarily calisthenics, but being able to do a muscle up, front lever, back lever, learning how to actually pull and use your upper body as well as the whole body, really shaped the movement modality, really brought me another way, which then led me into climbing. So that's how climbing kind of
And so it's still been mostly body weight based things, but with different apparatus.
Well, only in the past year, I'd say, have I started to actually lift things, like started really checking out the difference between an RDL versus a deadlift. I didn't know there was a difference, and like not Olympic lifting, but basic leg strength. And even now I'm cycling in LA to get to classes in different places. If I only have to go 10 miles, I'll ride a single speed bike and just do things like that. So I think the truth is I like having these different modalities. I think it breeds, it opens the door for me where I almost feel like a beginner again in certain aspects. Not that I'm advanced in any way in anything. It's just I like the variance, and I like I like discovering new things. And I think that that's true to this day with even the things that I share at this point, with the way I teach. So that kind of takes me in. So some questions about you as a teacher, right? Because I think we first have to understand ourselves as teachers by understanding who we are as a student, right? And I've said this to students all the time, like the best way to have beginner's mind is to actually be a beginner at something. Yep.
And if as a teacher, you are not an active beginner in something, you're going to lose a certain amount of humility, empathy, and skill. If as a teacher, you don't just have beginner's mind, but you are actively learning something that is new that you are particularly bad at. Like if you are learning something to the degree that you are bad at that thing, you'll probably be a good teacher in the thing that you're teaching, because there's so much more resonance and empathy and understanding of the process. And so for me, I said at the beginning that I'll take your class once in a while, but I've taken your class once in a while over the past 10 years, right? Because we've both been on Glo for a long time. So there are a couple of people on Glo that if I want to kind of do something new or different or check out, I'll take their class. And so I've seen in a way your ongoing development as a student, because the techniques that you teach continue to evolve. And I think for me, I think that is an admirable and necessary trait. I will say this, which is I know within a minute of taking someone's class if they actually practice. I know. And because there's a different feel. There's like there's a way of teaching from a known experience versus a way of teaching from a memorized experience, and they're different. And the other thing you see with teachers that have an ongoing practice is, in most situations, that practice, their classes continue to change. They just continue to change, not because they're trying to change them.
Right.
But they evolve because there's new input. Like our interests and our values as a student, they evolve. And so that comes through with our teaching. And I don't know when it was. I honestly don't know when it was. But I noticed at some point in your greetings, like the Yoga Glo greetings, do you know what you say? Like you're like, hey, what's up?
Yeah,
welcome,
hello, my fellow yogis and movers.
Yeah. So what I'm wondering is, like, do you remember when there was a period when you kind of decided to, I mean, not to get too nuanced in why you make that decision, but do you, like, can you remember a time when it was like, oh, maybe it's yogis and movers, when I want to invite everyone and I don't want everyone to have to call themselves one thing?
Yeah. Well, first off, I just have to say, yeah, you are, man, I just love you, because I think it's wonderful. Well, it's just wonderful how attentive you are. Yeah, you observe very well. And like I said, I've been interviewed in many different ways, and this just makes it so much better. So anyway, enough of that. But yeah, actually, the conversation did come, and I forget the exact instance, but I think it was probably 3 or 4 years ago, honestly, that someone approached me and said, "Do you think what you teach is yoga?" That was a big.
Was that a kind of an accusatory way, not to go that far down?
It wasn't a kind way. Let's just say that it was very. And this is coming from, and it was definitely from someone who was standing on the yoga box, so to speak.
Sure. I got you.
You know, and for me, there's a whole lot of work that had to happen there as far as how I took that conversation. Sure. But it was like,
I would not take it well.
Well, you know, and I didn't blow up, but it was a conversation of like, well, I thought yoga is inclusivity, and yoga is really more screw the movement, the asana, and even the breath work and all that. I thought it's very much a self-introspection, self-inquiry practice. Sure. I thought that's what it meant,
actually is,
among its many definitions, right? But somehow to that person, me teaching really was like hand balancing and teaching somewhat of a quote unquote stronger practice was not yoga. And that immediately made me go, and I asked the question, well, then what is it to you? They're like, well, you're moving, you're teaching movement. And in that instance, I remember going, at first being mad that I was being told it was something separate from yoga. And then going in my mind, well, that's fine if that's the conversation they have in their head. I actually feel that this is still yoga to me, but they bring up a good point. Maybe I'm actually, by saying yogis every time, this is being actually very exclusive to people that maybe don't want to be called yogis or resonate with yoga, quote unquote. No, they're moving and they're coming here. If it's purely physical, who am I to judge that that's their way of tapping in? Because it is a tapping in of some kind. And so I started thinking, okay, fine. Yogis and movers. We're teaching some movement here, and we're still, there's the yoga element to me. That is the intentionality of breath, or the intentionality of understanding where your body is in space, understanding how your mind is operating while you do these things, difficult or not. But also, we are moving, sometimes dynamically, and sometimes we're a little more static. But that's where that came from, for sure.
I think a lot of times it's more accurate to be more general, and right, and so to not overly define yogi, because that has a historical, it has a more complicated historical context than mover, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So at what point, I'm trying to figure out the right way to say this. At what point do you feel like you became more interested in a pistol squat than triangle pose?
Yeah, well,
or are you? Do you know what I mean? Like are those like at this point in kind of your development? do you now, in terms of your movement work, tend to find more time moving in different squatting modalities than a more conventional triangle pose, warrior two, side angle pose?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's because I think, first I need to preface that I don't think it's because I think triangle is less useful or anything like that. That has less utility than, let's say, a pistol squat. Because I find, especially for a lot of bodies, if we're again talking about the physical side of things, a lot of people who sit all day or don't necessarily move or use their bodies in any way, doing a triangle pose for 5 deep breaths actually has a lot of benefit. There's so much in there, obviously, right? And it's a great way to tap into your proprioception, your ability to understand where you are in space. But over time, I realized things like triangle pose for me on a daily basis stopped serving my ability to walk or to walk up stairs. Yeah. What actually was necessary was my ability, again, body weight. I love being able to balance on one leg and move through all these different ranges of motion and move through flexion, extension, add in rotation, abduction to adduction, and being able to do all these things. I find it's added way more benefit to me now than when I was younger. I move better, not saying my practice. I run better, move better as a human, doing normal human things now than I did then, because of my expansion into other modalities, not just the asana side of things that I know from experience in my body.
It's interesting, when people will say take yoga off the mat, the implication always is a philosophical, psycho-emotional thing that we learn on the yoga mat and we take it into normal life. But we can do the same thing actually with how our body works.
Absolutely.
And the actual demands of our body in off the mat don't require us to do a 5-minute passive forward bend ever. But they do require us to do dynamic movement in different loaded planes. So for me, it's like I think about everything that I do in my body as just expanding an asana repertoire. And I understand that the asana I practice has a specific historical context. And I appreciate that for that, but I'm also of equal interest in other movement modalities that I won't even say supplement it, but they're just another way of being present in a body and trying to help that body work. I have last 2 questions for you.
Okay? Yeah, please.
Which is kind of along those lines, right? You are physically very proficient. And there's 2 things that come up for me as a teacher from watching your level of proficiency. Number 1 is, I wonder, what are the hardest, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. For your body, I'll start with me. I will tell you, my easiest hard poses are arm balances. This is what my body's able to do. I have a decent strength to weight ratio. So I can make certain arm balances that are hard for a large population. They're not as hard for me.
Understood.
But my hardest hard postures are pretty much everything else, but especially back bends. So back bends are the poses that, for me, both in terms of how my mind works, but mostly how my body works. Back bends, I have the low. That's like my lowest ceiling in terms of my postural abilities. What's that like for you? Because we, like, people that study with you, we know that those, not that you don't work hard for them, but we know you have an extremely high proficiency when you're on your hands.
Yes, sir.
So what pushes your buttons?
I think I'm the same as you. Is backbending actually is the least natural. I mean, I don't want to say, maybe natural is not the way to put it, but I have to purposely make myself do backbends in the practice if I'm in a public class, because that's the thing I would probably omit the most, right? So I feel, and specifically backbends, that don't involve an inversion, right? So if I invert in back bend, then that seems a little more, I feel a little more proficient. But let's just take, I mean, not Setu Bandhasana or Setu Bandha Sarvangasana, but if I do like Urdhva Dhanurasana is one that I have to really focus on to do, but I feel great after I do it. But it is one that in the past few years, I've kind of shied away from, but I've slowly gotten back into it in the last year. Back bends, big one.
So right now, if you had to either A, press into handstand while talking, or B, do Urdhva Dhanurasana while talking, you'd rather do A?
I'd rather do A, but I know B would give me some growth on many levels. Try B, I would. Yeah. But A would be the go-to. I mean, I could talk upside down for a while. You know, that's just comfortable. But
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And then I think like the last real question I have for you about teaching, and it's the thing to me. Like I'm from the Midwest, so I really have a significant allergy when someone says something positive to me. The thing to me that is for you, like I think the thing to me that is remarkable about your teaching is that despite the fact that you have a very despite the fact you have an extremely proficient asana practice, you do two things really well, which is you sequence for hard poses and easy poses, but you're good at sequencing, really good at sequencing. And also I've never felt rushed in one of your classes. So there's two things there. For a lot of people that have a high proficiency in their postures, they're sometimes not quite as good at sequencing because they haven't had to go through as many steps to get there. Do you know what I mean? Like for me, absolutely. Like we'll say a back bend, right? Like for me, I'm really good at sequencing for most things, including back bends, because it's still, if I want to do Urdhva Dhanurasana right now, it's going to take me 20 minutes. And it's not random 20 minutes. I have to do really specific things for 20 minutes to get there.
Yep.
But sometimes when you have people with certain high level skills, they don't know how to get other people to where they're able to get to in their body. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I mean, I think it comes back to the humility thing that you're talking about, or that the resonance, the ability to relate. First, and not to blow smoke, but like for Urdhva, I remember this was years before. This is when you first had I think you were doing things that were like 3 poses to get into this, right? And it's not saying that that's just only those 3 poses, but like if you're in a time crunch, these are the 3 poses. And I remember there was one for Urdhva Dhanurasana, and you were like, all right, Setu Bandhasana, dolphin pose, Anjaneyasana, Urdhva Dhanurasana. That was pretty much what you put together, right? And this is it's not a decade ago, but it's some time ago. Like my sequencing, I actually owe a lot to you, whether you know it or not, is watching your videos, taking your classes, and also looking at the information that you have out there, even prior to like social media times. You sure. Yeah, I think you are actually a very big inspiration on sequencing, because if the question ever comes up of like, well, where do you get your ideas of sequencing, or at least where do you get inspired by? You're pretty much number one. That you really are smart, and it's. I mean, I know you asked me the question, but like that is you were a very big inspiration then, and still are, as far as like intelligent sequencing, because that does exist. I think sometimes people get a little muddled up with like sequencing and like, oh, well, you know, if it's well-rounded, it's great, which is true. There are many ways to sequence, but it's the intentionality, or like having an anchor of some sort that you're going for, that matters the most when it comes to sequencing. Going back to your question.
It makes sense to me that dovetails actually into your background with the yoga work stuff. You know what I mean? Because it's, I think the way I approach things and the way that classic 2000s yoga works world approaches things, they have, it's not the same, but there is a lot of crossover.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. And then the other thing too is like, what I was saying about not feeling rushed. So I think as a yoga teacher, we have a difficult job in that we're trying to teach people something, but we're also trying to help people feel satiated in their body, right?
Yeah.
So if someone comes to like a level 2, 3, level 3, 5, whatever it is, right? They often, that student has the expectation that they're going to move enough to feel satiated.
Right.
And so one thing that teachers can do in that environment is just make everything feel really fast and crammed in, right?
Packed it
and
in.
that's kind of a modality. But I think, like I would say in your class, like the thing, like taking a hard class from you versus a hard class from someone else. Like if I take a hard class from you, there are going to be some postures in there that I don't have the ability to do, but I'm not going to feel rushed. You know what I mean? And I prefer that. I would prefer to have like a barrier to entry in a pose, like, oh, I just don't have that strength and range, so I can't do that thing. So I'm going to do the thing before that thing. And I'm going to work hard, but I'm not going to be rushed. And I wonder if for you that's intentional, or if it's just that in your practice, you've just always liked a certain pace that is not like being late for a meeting.
Well, I think there's two things I'll say here. First, thanks for the kind reflection and for seeing that in me. I'm fortunate enough to have joined Glo now 12 years ago. I think 2010 is when I joined on. I think you're at the same time, right?
A little after.
Maybe in that pocket.
Yeah.
And when I look at some of the older videos, because I do.
Oh, you do?
I'm like, oh my God.
Why do you do that to yourself?
What am I doing? Yeah, it's like, how did anybody take these classes? This is, it's horrendous. And I'm hard on myself, but just from a really outside perspective, if I was training someone to teach and that's how they taught, I'd be like, we need to have a discussion, a very good discussion. And so for you to say that it's not rushed, I guess you're not taking the older ones, because the older ones are like, oh my God.
Well, I've not exactly taken every class in the library.
No, that's not what I meant. But like an older one is like,
maybe I've been a good picker.
Yeah, no, you've been a good picker, and I think look, in the past,
but I don't think it's so much your style. I think for me, again, from the outside, it feels to me like when you make classes hard, you make them hard because of the skill level of the posture, not because of like the rate at which you're hauling through things.
Absolutely.
Or maybe that's what I've been sensible enough to select into it. It always feels like there's still time to do the thing, or to realize like you just can't do that thing.
Well, I think the intentionality is there. Again, if I use the word anchor or focus, or especially teaching online, I feel very fortunate personally. My experience with being able to teach on Glo and teach online, it's given me this ability to have to basically focus on one thing and kind of run with that for whatever time allotment I have, which is, I think in turn has taught me to be able to teach specific things in a succinct way without thinking that I need a huge amount of depth. Doesn't necessarily go deep. Depth can still be shallow, but be so bountiful and abundant. Sorry to use those words. It's just so yoga cliche, but you know what I mean? Like I think, and so I think because of actually being on things like Glo, it's helped, especially in the public forum, how I lead classes. But online, I would much rather do less, physically speaking, like a number of postures, you name it, than do a lot to fill space. I don't know. It just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
I think personally in my body, the way I practice, less is more. That really is the case. And so with, like you said, with difficulty of a class, if it's a level 2-3, I'll even say as of late, hey, this 2-3 means that I'm kind of going to do maybe some postures that might be a little bit more challenging, but it also means I'm probably not going to cue you as much as to how many other options there are. Because I'm very much for options. I love options. And I know you like options. You talked about it, speaking to the general. Like that is the I think to me, that is a hallmark of a pretty decent teacher, when you're able to at least give a few options and how do we make this inclusive for everybody, regardless of level. I know it anyway.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So yes, I think it is intentional, and it's just come with time and experience. Because go look at those old ones if you ever have a free moment, and you will be like, maybe
all I can see is how much
conversation,
how much even worse my hair was 10 years ago.
Was it?
It's just always overgrown. I had like more hair, and I was even skinnier, and somehow whiter.
But dude, you're skinny, and
the further I go back, the bigger my hair was, the skinnier I was, and the whiter.
But it might be the bigger hair that makes you look skinnier. Maybe that's.
I know exactly. It could be. It's some combination of all.
For
of those
me,
things.
it's not the hair. For me, it's very much the clothing. I'm like, what are you wearing? That also. Like, what is going?
But we have to grant ourselves some grace. Things change with time.
I mean, no, it's a beautiful evolution. Absolutely. So yeah, but
anytime you're forced to work with constraints, I think you get better at your job, right? Because you have to figure out how to do that thing in a different way. So for me, right, even before Glo, I learned so much by writing a ton for Yoga Journal.
I was going to say, that's where I remember you from. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I wrote for Yoga Journal, and I am not like, I'm very happy to call myself a teacher. Mm-hmm. I am not a writer. I can write, but it's excruciating. And it's like, it takes forever. It's super inefficient. And if you've ever read anything of mine and it makes sense at all, it's because it was edited, at least back in the day. But for me, I became a better yoga teacher because I was writing about yoga.
Yeah.
So working with those parameters and those constraints and thinking about a different audience and communicating in a way that was different, it made me have to change my craft so that it worked for the moment. And I've always felt that with Glo. We come down and it's like, like a 5-minute class on, level 8 back bends. We're like, really?
Okay.
All right. How would we do that? But yeah, when you work, when you have to respond to different conditions, and you don't give up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you actually do it.
Make it work. You make it happen.
Then of course you get better when the constraints are off. It's like a drill.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like in the arts or dance or athletics, it's like doing a drill. And then when that drill is over, if you do it enough, you're better at the thing.
Yeah.
Like whatever the broader thing is that you are drilling a component of. I feel that way as a teacher. I have no doubt that I am much better at my craft as a function of, I mean, this is a Glo podcast, but not just being it would be any environment, but it's the forced parameters that make us think and communicate in different ways.
Well, it's adaptability, right? I mean, and if we're going down like a Darwin type thing, it's like the ones that survive are obviously the ones that can adapt and evolve, right? To the surroundings. And it very much, I think it speaks also to personality, where it's not that the world revolves around you. It's that you learn how to fit into the world, at least the environment that you're in that moment, And I think having specific parameters, it's learning how to keep yourself, the elements of yourself, you as you see yourself, but within the scope that people are asking you to be in at that time and place, and knowing that that's not permanent, but it's just very much, okay, how do I fit in here? How do I still speak true to my voice, but how do I make it so that it suits the people that are asking me to do this? And I think as a teacher or as a sharer of yoga and anything that we do, I think that's kind of what the work is more and more. We keep learning how to better, digest the information and also be able to share it back so that it's digestible for other people. Like you keep, making it available and being inclusive about it all. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I had this, I'll call it a moment, but in a way it was a little bit more than a moment, which was, I was the youngest of a new generation of teachers that was teaching at yoga journal conferences, right? So back in the day, a little bit before, before Glo, before streaming content like this, there were videos and stuff, but before streaming content, and before a much larger proliferation in yoga conferences around the world, the main conferences were yoga journal conferences. And I taught at those from a pretty young age. So I was the young generation. And as social media started to come about, as streaming content started to come about, I was younger and I was much more formative in my career. So it was easier for me to adapt to some of the newer content, right? It was easier for me to be like, oh yeah, okay, I will happily teach a 20-minute online class instead of, no, it has to be a 2-hour class. So I was able to like be of that young generation that adopted that adapted to that changing environment. And for me, there were so many of, not my main teacher, but so many of my teachers and so many people of a certain generation that I have so much professional admiration for, but they didn't really choose to adapt to a new environment. And so they aren't as well known by a younger generation because they're not in the medium in which a younger generation finds those people. And they're amazing teachers, but for any number of reasons, they didn't put themselves into various platforms where other people could get to know them.
Right. But I almost feel like, as far as if we're talking about that generation, I mean, I hate to categorize them that way, but that generation just before, when you're saying you were young and that the ones that were right before, it's almost, I think there's also, maybe there's a choice too, though, to not want to be that far out there. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's what I kind of gathered from a lot of the ones that I've been fortunate enough to kind of come into, even like, just not even naming names, but there have been a few that, that I ask, like, well, why didn't you go down this path, or why didn't you choose to do this? Because you could easily do it. It's, well, actually, I didn't want to. I think there's, and to their point, they might be holding on to it that way for a specific, like, not a dogmatic reason. They might be holding their ground for tradition's sake, or that might be the case, but
any number of reasons,
whatever number. Yeah, exactly. But I see that for that generation. I think now, like you, and even myself, I think it's like adaptability is a big thing. And it's not like, oh, I need to fit into this. That's not where it comes from. But it's very much of like, how can I be used this way, this way, this way? And like, how can I give in this way, and this way? Which I think has proven quite positive and good for, if we want to call it careers, that gives us access to people. And
I've always been extremely motivated to teach. I don't really care so much in what environment I'm teaching. So if it's through, a post, or through a podcast, or through a Glo class, or through an in-person something, I'm just happy to communicate and teach because I really like the subject matter.
Has that been like for me? Young? Like, do you feel like
I was young? Since I was young, I always wanted to teach. I always wanted to teach. I didn't know it would be this subject. I liked philosophy as a kid. I like philosophy as a kid more than I like philosophy now. Like, I will deal with philosophy now.
I mean, that's pretty amazing. Wow.
I like practical matters. But I always wanted to be a teacher, and it was only through falling in love with yoga that I was like, okay, well, this is the subject matter that I want to communicate. And so I always have to remind myself that you have to communicate to people in a medium that people are willing to hear that teaching. And the medium of how people hear things changes. It's changed so much in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
So for me personally, I don't want to be I don't want to say stubborn because it's automatically negative. I don't want to be so beholden to say, no, I can only teach this one thing in the one environment. I want to say, okay, well, whatever environment someone is willing to hear something in, let me do my best to adapt to that environment. I'm not going to change what I'm teaching. What we're teaching is what we're teaching, regardless of environment.
Right.
But being able to, you know, change strategy so that people hear what we want to communicate by being on platforms that people pay attention to me, that's an easy choice to make.
No,
yeah. Well, Dice, it's really nice to talk to you. It's mostly nice to take most of your classes. Sometimes, you know how many times you know the world, your students love you and curse you, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I've taken, but I've almost only ever taken your harder classes. So I bet I haven't cursed. I bet I wouldn't curse you if I was taking like your 1-2 Shavasana class. But in everything else, I'm appreciative that your class is there. And I also get a little bit mad at you, and I have to get through that. And that's very helpful.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. And I'm sure, like you said, many other people, have gotten mad at me. And I've been teaching publicly here in LA again as of late. And I experienced the anger and the happiness all at the same time firsthand. So I now remember what that feels like. So
yeah, exactly. Well, welcome back into the studio of being back in the room.
Yeah. And welcome back to you being in Maui and teaching a retreat after, 2 years.
It's been, we were having a little conversation right before we started. And as we are recording, this is the first time in 2 years that I've taught away. I've taught 2 in-person classes in San Francisco when the studio like temporary opened before I moved to Southern California.
Right.
But this is the first time I've gotten on an airplane to teach in 2 years.
Right.
And it feels pretty good.
Yeah.
It's good to be in the room with people.
I don't even have to say I can imagine, because I do know. I know. It feels good. That this is what I feel like we do.
Yeah. Nice to connect with you, man.
Pleasure to connect with you too. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you to our entire team behind the scenes at Glo. I'm so grateful for your care and commitment to serving our members around the world. Thank you to our teachers for so beautifully sharing your gifts and talents. I'm also grateful to our lovely community of Glo members. You've supported us since 2008, and because of you, we get to continue to do the work we love. It's the combined support of our team, our teachers, and our community that grants me the privilege to continue to bring you the Glo Podcast. Thank you to Lee Schneider at Red Cub Agency for production support. And the beautiful music you're hearing now is by Carrie Rodriguez and her husband, Luke Jacobs. And remember, take care of yourself, because our world needs you. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. You can find the Glo Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or glo.com/podcast, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Derik Mills.